My son left me $40 million and a warning. Well, not Throidein. Now his widow is in prison for what she did. Reddit stories. He knew she was dangerous. He tried to protect me from the grave. And when I uncovered her lies, sabotage, and the truth behind his death, I used every penny she wanted to destroy her story. Before we get started, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Seth, don't start that engine. That was the sentence that changed everything. Garrett's voice cut through the soft hum of my morning thoughts like a sudden crack of thunder. It was just past 9 a.m. I was adjusting my black tie in the rearview mirror, the final touch to a suit that had taken me 10 minutes to put on and 30 to gather the will for. My son's will was being read downtown at 11. My plan was simple. Drive, sit, endure, nod where necessary. Maybe say something poignant if the moment called for it. But Garrett changed the plan. I turned slowly, expecting maybe a wave or neighborly comment. Instead, he was running full speed across his perfect lawn, bathrobe flapping open just enough to show plaid pajamas underneath. The man had never sprinted a day in his life that I knew of, but here he was, barefoot and panting, arms flailing in panic. "Don't start the engine," he repeated, gasping. "What's going on?" I stepped away from the driver's side door. My hand still hovered over the key fob, ready to unlock. Garrett bent over at the waist, hands on his knees. Last night, at 11:30, I saw Helen. That name alone made my gut clench. Helen, my daughter-in-law. Or more precisely now, Martin's widow. She'd played her role to perfection at the funeral last week. Black dress, trembling chin, handkerchief never far from her fingers. But there'd been something off about the whole act, something too practiced. "What about Helen?" I asked, already fearing the answer. "She was under your hood, had tools, spent at least 15 minutes messing with something. Then she saw me watching from my bedroom window and bolted. I stared at my car. Same old silver sedan I'd driven for 8 years. No scratches, no alarms. But Garrett was a retired cop. He knew what he saw. His instincts were sharp even now, 10 years removed from the force. She parked on the street," he continued. "Didn't pull into your drive. That's how I knew it wasn't normal." It hit me like a punch to the chest. Helen. Of course. With Martin gone, there were only two real contenders for the inheritance, me and her. My son's company had grown from a modest cybersecurity consultancy into a juggernaut, protecting everything from hospitals to hedge funds. He was worth $40 million at the time of his death. That figure wasn't whispered, it was known. Helen was banking on being a rich widow. But if Martin left it to me, or split it in a way that diminished her share, well, a fatal accident could fix that. I looked at my car again, this time like it was a coiled snake in my garage. My skin tingled. I stepped further back. "Garrett, thank you," I said. "You may have just saved my life." "What are you gonna do?" "Call Tom Riley. He'll know if something was tampered with." Garrett nodded grimly. "If it was her, you'll want proof. That woman's not right." He was right. Helen was smart. Polished and dangerous, I was beginning to realize. And if Garrett's timeline was accurate, she'd given herself just enough time to sabotage my vehicle without rushing the job. I dialed Tom. He answered on the second ring. "Tom Riley. What's up, Seth?" "I need you at my house immediately. I think my car's been tampered with. Possibly sabotage." A beat. Then his tone turned grave. "Don't touch anything. I'll be there in 15. Full kit." I ended the call and took a step back into the garage, not toward the car, but toward the workbench. My breathing slowed. Focus kicked in. I wasn't some helpless old man. I was an engineer once, and instinct told me Helen's sabotage wouldn't be clumsy. I was right. 15 minutes later, Tom arrived. He was all business. Heavy toolbox, grease-stained hands, and eyes that scanned like a machine. Within 20 minutes, he found the cuts. Brake lines clean and deliberate. Not frayed, sliced. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, he said. These aren't rookie mistakes. The brakes would have held for about 10 miles, then gone. My route to the law firm downtown was exactly 10.5 miles. She tried to kill me, I said softly, more to myself than to Tom. Tom turned from the undercarriage and met my eyes. Yeah, Seth, she did. And now she was downtown, likely sipping coffee, preparing to accept a fortune she thought she'd already won. Maybe she was checking her watch, wondering when the news of my tragic accident would reach her. But I was still alive. And I had a taxi to call. I was going to show up. And when I walked into that conference room and Helen saw me breathing, upright, and very much not dead, well, I wanted to see her face when she realized the game wasn't over. I wanted to see her faint. The taxi ride downtown felt like being carried inside a silent confession booth. No radio, no chatter from the driver. Just me, sitting with a briefcase full of documents and a brain running through the last 15 years like a courtroom drama. Martin had always been the smartest person in any room. He didn't inherit that from me. I was good with numbers and building things, but my son had that rare mix of creativity and logic. He saw patterns before anyone else could. Started his cybersecurity firm from our basement when he was barely 22, running code while I brought him grilled cheese sandwiches and tried not to interrupt his flow. I remember the first time he showed me a check for $10,000. He'd stared at it like it was a magic trick. Someone paid me to break into their system, Dad. On purpose. I hadn't understood at the time. Now, years later, his company had clients across the country. Banks, hospitals, government agencies. He'd died at 42, not from an accident, not from some heroic sacrifice. 3 weeks of stomach pain, weight loss, confusion, gone. Helen had been in charge of everything during those 3 weeks. She chose the doctors. She limited the visits. She signed the hospice paperwork before I could ask questions. And now, with a will waiting downtown, she thought she'd collected her last piece of the puzzle. I watched the city rise around me through the taxi window. Downtown Chicago had always felt too fast, too vertical. I was a man of concrete and tools, not towers and mergers. But today, I belonged here. The building was all glass and chrome, Reynolds and Mitchell in bold gold lettering across the double doors. I stepped out, the driver nodding politely as I handed him a few bills. I straightened my tie, took a breath, and walked in. The receptionist was young, pretty in that curated social media way. She glanced at her computer and said, "Mr. Jordan, conference room B, right down the hallway." The name felt strange in her mouth. Martin's name. My name. I walked slowly the way you do when you know the punch is coming, but you want to savor the seconds before it lands. The door was open. Helen sat at the head of a long, polished table, flanked by 2 lawyers I didn't recognize. Her black dress was sleek and expensive. Her posture screamed confidence. Spine straight, ankles crossed just so, a leather folder in front of her like it held the keys to the kingdom. She looked up, saw me. Her eyes widened first, then her lips parted. Then she fainted. Not gracefully. Her head snapped backward and she slumped sideways, chair screeching as it tipped just slightly. One of the lawyers stood quickly, catching her before she hit the floor. I didn't move. Just watched. She came to after about 15 seconds, blinking rapidly, then scrambling upright like a cat caught falling off a fence. "Seth," she said, breathless. I thought you weren't coming." "No," I said. "You thought I wouldn't make it." Silence. The male attorney cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed?" Helen's voice was too sharp when she answered. Yes, let's." We sat. The lawyer opened a folder thick with signatures and notary seals. This is the last will and testament of Martin Jordan, executed on April the 1st of this year, 2 weeks before he died. Helen leaned forward. Martin specified that his entire estate, currently valued at approximately $40 million, be transferred to one individual. She tilted her head, waiting for the victory to be read aloud. The attorney continued, expression unreadable. To his father, Seth Jordan. Helen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. No, she said softly. That can't be right. The lawyer held up the signed document. It's right here, witnessed, notarized. Your husband made his wishes clear. She stared at the paper like it was a magic trick that turned into a snake. Her fingers trembled. There must be a mistake, she said. Martin, he wouldn't. But I was already opening the envelope the attorney had slid across the table. Inside, in my son's handwriting, was a single sentence. Dad, be careful. If anything happens to me, don't trust Helen. I felt it like a hand on my shoulder. Martin had known. Even as he died, even as the poison crept through his veins, he'd known. I looked up at her. Helen looked like a wax figure in a heat wave. Melting, cracking, unraveling. You tried to kill me this morning, I said softly. She didn't deny it, just stared, because denial would have been a waste of energy. Everyone in that room knew what she'd done. She just didn't know what I was going to do next. The silence after the will reading wasn't the quiet kind. It had weight, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what Helen would do. She didn't scream, not right away. She stood slowly as if her chair might explode beneath her. Then she walked to the window, her back to us, hands clenched so tight her knuckles went pale. The lawyer kept speaking, some boilerplate about account transfers, legal timelines, but no one was listening. Not even him, I think. He was glancing at Helen too often, bracing for impact. I was his wife, she said without turning around. Legally, yes, the lawyer replied. But the will overrides spousal default inheritance when properly executed, and this one was... No, she snapped, spinning around. This is fraud. He would never do that to me. Her eyes landed on me like blades. You manipulated him. You turned him against me. You poisoned his mind. I didn't flinch. He saw through you, Helen. That's what happened. Her mouth twitched, not a smile, a spasm. Something involuntary, like she was losing control of her face. She sat down again, hard, and stared at the table. I want a copy, she muttered. Every page. Every signature. Of course, the lawyer said, sliding her a neatly clipped packet. You're entitled to a certified copy. She didn't take it, just stared. You know what your problem is? She said, lifting her head slowly. You always thought he was more like you than he really was. That got under my skin. She saw it. He wasn't your little clone, Seth. He hated how rigid you were, how old-fashioned. He hated that you never saw me for who I really was. Oh, I said, my voice calm. I saw you clearly from the start. I just hoped he'd see it too. Eventually. And yet he married me. Yes, and he died 3 years later. The lawyer cleared his throat again, clearly wanting to escape. If there's nothing else, I think we can adjourn. There's something else, I said. I reached into my briefcase and took out a manila folder, laid it on the table. Helen, I said, this contains the full report from Tom Riley. You know, the mechanic who found your handiwork this morning. Her face didn't change. No idea what you're talking about. I'm sure you don't. But the photos are in there. The cut brake lines, the tampered steering assembly, all of it. The lawyer stiffened. Are you suggesting? I'm stating, I said. This woman tried to kill me. Finally, a reaction. Helen lunged for the folder like it might explode. She opened it, eyes scanning, hands trembling slightly. "None of this proves anything," she said. "Anyone could have—" "There's video," I said quietly. That stopped her. She looked up, eyes narrowing. "What video?" "My neighbor Garrett has a camera, captures the whole street. High definition, time-stamped, shows you arriving at 11:47 last night, working under the hood, running when you saw him in the window." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time since I walked into that room, Helen looked like she understood she'd lost control of the narrative. The lawyer glanced between us. "This is serious. Should we involve the authorities?" "I already did," I said. "The police have copies of everything. They'll be in touch." Helen pushed away from the table so fast her chair tipped over behind her. She didn't pick it up. "This isn't over," she said, voice shaking. "No," I agreed. "It's just beginning." She stormed out, and I sat there, breathing in the silence she left behind. I didn't leave the law office right away. I sat there for a long while after Helen's footsteps vanished down the marble hallway, listening to the clock tick like it was counting something personal. Mr. Reynolds gathered the papers quietly, clearly unsure whether to treat me as a grieving father or a target of attempted murder. "Mr. Jordan," he said gently, "may I ask, are you safe?" "As safe as someone with a $40 million target on his back can be," I said. He didn't laugh. Lawyers rarely do when the word murder is in the room. "You did the right thing reporting it. If what you say is true—" "It is." He nodded. "Then justice will follow." "Maybe." But I wasn't counting on justice to be punctual. Or polite. I walked back out to the street where my taxi was still idling. I'd asked the driver to wait. Something told me I might want a quick getaway. I climbed in and gave him a new address. Not home. Not yet. I had one more stop to make. We drove south, out of the glass towers and into the older neighborhoods. The ones with porches and iron railings and families that had been there long enough to stop all locking their back doors. We pulled up outside a red brick bungalow with a sagging awning. I paid the driver, stepped out, and walked up the narrow path. Mrs. Hargrave answered on the third knock. 82 years old, sharp as a scalpel and twice as unforgiving. "Seth Jordan," she said, eyebrows arching. "Well, I'll be. You're still vertical." "I plan to stay that way," I said. She stepped aside without asking why I was there. That's how old neighbors work. You don't need a reason beyond showing up. We sat at her kitchen table, the same yellow formica that had hosted every bake sale plan and block watch meeting since the 70s. She poured coffee, strong, black, the kind that tastes like it's been waiting decades to scald someone honest. "She did it, didn't she?" she said, handing me a mug. "She tried." Mrs. Hargrave's face didn't change. "I told Martin the day he brought her home, that woman's got ambition leaking out her pores. And not the good kind." "I remember." "You were too polite back then." "I was too hopeful." She sipped. "So what now?" "I wait for the police to do their part. And I make sure the press hears the truth before Helen spins some sob story about being betrayed by a cruel father-in-law." Mrs. Hargrave grunted. "She'll cry on cue, don't doubt it." "I don't." The coffee was bitter but comforting, like honesty in a cup. "She wanted me dead before the reading," I said, mostly to myself. "She needed it to look clean, like fate." Mrs. Hargrave leaned back, arms crossed. "And now she's panicking because you walked in with a pulse and a plan." I looked at her. "You ever think we raise our sons too soft? Too generous?" She snorted. "No, we just live long enough to watch the women they marry undo all our work." I couldn't argue with that. I left an hour later, my head clearer, my heart heavier. By the time I returned home, Tom had sent over the full diagnostic report, detailed photos, measurements, labels. I saved everything into a folder and printed 2 copies, one for my lawyer, one for the detectives. I poured myself a whiskey, sat in my study, looked out at the quiet street where nothing ever happened until last night. Martin's face stared back at me from a framed photo on the shelf. Taken at age 35, standing in front of his first office, smiling like the world still made sense. "I'm still here, son," I said aloud, "and I'm going to make sure she pays for what she did, to both of us." Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one. Inside, I began writing everything down. The next morning, I woke with a purpose I hadn't felt since the day Martin opened his first office and handed me the key like it meant something sacred. Like we were building something together. Like family still meant what I thought it did. I made a list over breakfast. Names, places, documents. Not revenge, not yet. First, protection. Then, truth. I started with the video. Garrett met me on his porch. Coffee in one hand. Bathrobe tied a little tighter this time. "You weren't imagining things," I said. He nodded slowly. "Didn't think I was." "She fainted when she saw me." "Lawyer read the will. Everything goes to me." He blinked. "Huh." "No screaming, no threats. Just fainted. Then tried to claw her way back into control." Garrett sipped his coffee. "She won't go quietly." "I'm counting on it." We transferred the footage to a USB drive. It showed everything. Helen parking on the street, walking around to the passenger side of my car with a flashlight and a canvas tool bag. Working under the hood. Running when she noticed the curtains shift in Garrett's upstairs bedroom. High definition. Time-stamped. Indisputable. "You should be careful now," Garrett said. "Cornered animals don't always think straight." "She thinks I'm a problem she can still solve, but she's underestimating how dangerous a quiet man can be when he has nothing left to lose." He didn't argue. Back home, I sent the video to my lawyer, Edward Reynolds. I also sent him Tom's full report, complete with side-by-side images of the brake line sabotage and detailed annotations. At 11:08 a.m., Edward called. "This is enough for the DA to open a case," he said. "They'll want your statement on record." "I'm ready." "And Seth?" His voice shifted. Less lawyer, more human. "You're doing the right thing. She needs to be held accountable for your sake. And for Martin's." I didn't say thank you. I just nodded, even though he couldn't see me. After that, I opened the envelope I hadn't touched since Martin's death. Inside were 2 documents. His handwritten letter, short, final, sad. And a medical record summary I'd had doubts about but hadn't known what to do with. It was time to do something with it. Martin had gone from healthy to dead in less than a month. The official cause? Unknown gastrointestinal failure. But his usual doctor had been replaced. The lab reports were inconsistent. And Helen had chosen the private clinic, the hospice, and every specialist. It was poison. I was sure of it now. I scanned everything and added it to the folder I was building. The one labeled, "For the Prosecutor." By the end of the day, it was 2 inches thick. Paper and grief. Evidence and memory. At sunset, I drove to the cemetery. Martin's headstone was modest, just his name, his birth and death dates, and the phrase, "He built protection for others." He did, but not for himself. I stood there a long time, thinking, remembering. "I'm not going to stop, son," I said finally. "She doesn't get to smile her way out of this. Not after what she did to you, and what she tried to do to me." The wind was cold, but I didn't flinch. "She played her last hand," I said. "Now it's my turn." That night, I drafted a letter to the district attorney. It began with, "I believe my son was murdered, and I believe I was next." I hand-delivered the letter to the Cook County DA's office the following morning. I wore my funeral suit again, this time with a fresh shirt. I wanted them to see someone who was grieving, yes, but also someone prepared for war. They accepted it quietly, promised a formal response within 72 hours. I didn't wait. By that afternoon, I'd retained Marcus Chen, a private investigator Edward had recommended. He was in his late 50s, thinning hair, a permanent scowl, and eyes like steel trapdoors. Former IRS forensic auditor, not the kind of man who guessed. He met me at a coffee shop near the courthouse. No small talk. Just opened his laptop, took out a notebook, and said, "What are we proving?" That Helen had motive, means, and opportunity, I said. That she was planning to kill me the same way she killed my son. His pen didn't stop moving. Financials? 5 years of marriage to a man worth $40 million? She had access to everything. And when Martin got sick, she took control of his care, isolated him, managed every doctor, every appointment, every medication. Credit card debt? I nodded. At least 6 figures, according to a mutual friend with access to their financial planner. Her lifestyle was cracking. Martin's death bought her time, but only if the money transferred cleanly. Marcus closed his notebook and tapped his knuckle twice on the table. I'll start with the financials. If she moved assets, I'll find it. If she paid anyone off the books to help her, I'll find them too. He paused, then added, This will be thorough. That's why I hired you. When I got home, I found a voicemail from Helen. No, hello. No, we need to talk. Just her voice, low and controlled. I know what you're doing, Seth. I know you think you're some kind of hero, but you're just an old man clinging to a dead son's money. You think Martin loved you more than me? Think again. He told me things you wouldn't believe. Things about you. Things that would destroy what little reputation you have left. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there in my kitchen, phone still in hand, and I laughed. Not out of humor. There was nothing funny about it, but the sheer audacity, the desperation dripping from every word. She knew the walls were closing in. She was bluffing, and badly. But she wasn't stupid. She was scared. The next day, Marcus returned with a preliminary report. Helen had maxed out 4 credit cards, over $180,000 in revolving debt. Private shopping accounts, international transfers. She's been laundering purchases through a shell LLC registered in Nevada, he said. Looks like she was trying to shield assets in case of a messy probate. I added the report to the growing file. Get me proof of any unusual medical activity during Martin's last month. Private prescriptions, cash-paid physicians, anything. He nodded once. On it. Later that week, Edward called. The DA was officially opening a preliminary inquiry. They wanted all documents, financial, mechanical, medical. I overnighted the file that night. We weren't in the shadows anymore. This was real. By Friday, I stood in my living room surrounded by manila folders, printouts, and photos. The evidence was airtight. My son had been slowly poisoned, and when I became the last obstacle between Helen and generational wealth, she tried to remove me the old-fashioned way. It almost worked. I poured myself a drink, sat at the kitchen table, watched the sun bleed down behind the maple trees in the backyard. The last few weeks had turned me into something I never expected. Calm. Not vindictive. Not bitter. Just focused. She thought she was playing chess. But I was laying track for a freight train. The following Monday, Dr. Sarah Williams came to my house with her findings. She carried a black leather briefcase and the demeanor of someone who'd stood in courtrooms and silenced entire juries. I reviewed the lab reports you sent, she said, sitting at my dining table. Your son's symptom timeline, as described, aligns with classic arsenic poisoning. I didn't speak. She continued, flipping open a folder. Fatigue, gastrointestinal distress, rapid weight loss, neurological confusion, all progressing over 3 weeks. And that can go unnoticed by a doctor? By a distracted one, sure, or by one working under instruction not to test for heavy metals. I leaned back. Helen chose every doctor. She knew what she was doing, Sarah said. In my opinion, as an expert witness, your son's death should have been ruled suspicious. At minimum, a full toxicology panel should have been performed post-mortem. Wasn't. They cremated him, I said flatly. She nodded. Harder to trace, but not impossible. I've seen cases built on circumstantial timelines stronger than this. She left the report with me. I added it to the growing pile. The file now had its own drawer. By midweek, I had everything the DA needed to present to a grand jury. A seamless narrative. Motive, means, opportunity. A dead man's warning. A failed murder attempt on the air. A paper trail of financial desperation. And soon, I'd have one more piece. Surveillance footage. I visited Mrs. Patterson 2 blocks over, an elderly widow with a dog named Peanut, and a security system installed by her grandson after a break-in scare. Of course you can look, Seth, she said, sliding her remote over. It's all backed up to the cloud, and I don't delete anything without checking with Travis first. We queued up the date. There it was, Helen's BMW. The time, 11:47 p.m. Her silhouette, tool bag, my garage. Camera 2, a side angle, caught her crouching, flashlight in her mouth, working like someone who knew exactly where to cut. Camera 3 caught her leaving, looking up and down the street, wiping her hands on a towel. I downloaded it all to a new flash drive and labeled it in thick red marker. Final nail. Then I waited, and she, predictably, struck again. A letter, no return address, hand-delivered to my front porch. Inside, a single typed page. Seth, you don't know everything. Keep pushing, and I'll make sure your name is dragged through courtrooms for years. Martin said things in therapy, things about you. Don't test me. I'm not afraid to bury you the long way. No signature, just threat. I stared at the paper for a long time, then fed it into the shredder. She was trying to provoke me, to scare me, to smear Martin's memory with whatever lies she'd managed to twist. But you can't shame someone who already lost the only thing that mattered. That night, I drafted one last summary for the DA's office. Timeline, financial motive, medical evidence, forensic photos, surveillance footage. And finally, Martin's own warning. A man's final words to his father, written when death was already at his doorstep. Be careful with Helen. I was. And now it was her turn to be careful, because the next time someone fainted, it wouldn't be at a will reading. It would be in a courtroom when she realized that $40 million came with a prison sentence. The grand jury convened on a Thursday in early April. I wasn't allowed inside, but Edward kept me informed through carefully worded texts. DA presenting medical and financial evidence now. Jurors paying close attention. Helen's attorney submitted a preemptive statement. Full of holes, nothing that refutes Riley's report. Video footage made a strong impact. Jury asked to replay the sabotage clip twice. By 3:42 p.m., I got the message that shifted the whole axis of my life. Indictment approved, arrest warrant issued, Helen Jordan to be taken into custody within 48 hours. I read it once. Then again. Then sat back in my chair. I should have felt triumphant. I didn't. It was relief. Clean and cold. Like stepping out of a long, feverish illness into mountain air. Helen had taken everything. My son, my holidays, my peace. But not my dignity, not my life. And now, not my silence. That night, I made my first public move. I emailed Patricia Jennings at the Tribune. A reporter with a reputation for balance and precision. No appetite for scandal, but an eye for justice stories. Subject line, you ran Helen Jordan's wedding spread. Want to run her arraignment? She replied in under 10 minutes. We met the next morning in a coffee shop near Union Station. I brought a flash drive and a printed folder. I'd taken the time to organize it the way a prosecutor would, labeled tabs, color-coded highlights, chain of evidence documented. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she tapped the file. Can I verify this independently? Yes, the DA's office will confirm the charges later today. You'll be the first. Patricia looked at me over her glasses. Why me? Because you've never written about Helen. No bias, no grudge, just the facts. She nodded. You understand this will be public. Ugly. You'll be dragged into it. I've already been dragged, I said. Now I'm walking. That night, the story broke. Wife of tech CEO charged in murder plot and sabotage cover-up. The online version went viral. The headline was damning, but the article itself was brutal in its precision. No speculation, just fact. Martin Jordan, cybersecurity innovator. Mysterious illness. Father's near-fatal vehicle sabotage. Surveillance footage. Mechanical sabotage reports. Private investigator testimony. And a single quote from me. My son trusted the wrong person. I almost paid for that mistake with my life. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even if it has to crawl through poison to get there. By morning, Helen's mugshot was trending online. Arrested without incident, booked, and released on bond. No comment to reporters. Her lawyer issued a bland denial, My client maintains her innocence and looks forward to clearing her name. But the public didn't wait for court. Comments flooded in. Support, outrage, sympathy, not for her, for Martin, and for me. The days that followed felt like walking through fire after the flames had gone out. Everything looked the same. My kitchen, my neighborhood, my routines. But the temperature had changed. I received letters, emails, some from former clients of Martin's, offering condolences. Others from people I didn't know. Strangers who'd read the article and seen their own story in the bones of mine. Parents betrayed, elders erased, families twisted by greed. I didn't reply to most, but I read every word. And I thought about Martin. He'd left behind more than a will. He'd left me the strength to fight for his memory. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late May. Helen would be in that courtroom, and I'd be sitting in the front row, not to gloat, but to bear witness. Because if she wanted to pretend none of this happened, she'd have to do it while looking me in the eye. The courtroom wasn't what you'd imagine from movies. No oak-paneled drama, no thunderclap of gavels. Just beige walls, fluorescent lights, and a low hum of forced civility. But what it lacked in spectacle, it made up for in weight. Helen sat 2 rows ahead of me at the defense table. Her hair was straighter than usual, darker, likely dyed to soften her public image. She wore a navy blue pantsuit, modest, professional. Not the widow in black anymore. Just another defendant. She didn't look back at me, not once. Her attorney was a man named Brandt, all gray wool suits and practiced indignation. He spent the morning questioning the validity of the video footage, Riley's qualifications, and Marcus Chen's chain of custody. He didn't argue that someone had tampered with the breaks. Just tried to convince the court that someone else could have done it. But when the prosecutor, a wiry, soft-spoken woman named Jacinda Riley, introduced Martin's medical file and Dr. Williams's toxicology report, the energy shifted. Brandt objected. Judge overruled. When Dr. Williams took the stand and calmly described the pattern of arsenic poisoning, matching symptom by symptom with Martin's final weeks, Helen's right leg began bouncing. A small thing, but I noticed. I wasn't watching the case anymore. I was watching her unravel. When Jacinda introduced Martin's handwritten note, the one that said, "Be careful with Helen," Brandt's last objection was overruled again. Helen flinched. The judge called for a recess. I didn't move. I sat there, staring at the back of her head, letting her feel the presence of the man she failed to kill. Outside reporters circled like gulls, shouting questions no one answered. Patricia Jennings stood off to the side, taking notes, observing the spectacle with the same calm detachment she'd brought to our coffee shop weeks before. Back home, I found my inbox full. Offers from podcasts, a documentary producer, a lawyer asking if I'd join a victim advocacy group. I ignored most of them. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet. I'd spent the last month calculating exactly how to use Martin's estate. Some of it had already been donated. Cancer research, cybersecurity scholarships, endowments in his name. Quietly, without ceremony. But now I was ready to make it public. I wrote a statement. Clean, short, and final. Martin Jordan's legacy will not be defined by tragedy, but by transformation. The entire estate he left me will be used to create a foundation in his name, dedicated to protecting the vulnerable, empowering innovators, and holding the corrupt accountable. His wife tried to kill that legacy. I will spend the rest of my days ensuring she failed. Seth Jordan, I sent it to the Tribune. Published the next morning. The article went viral. Suddenly, I wasn't just a grieving father or near-murder victim. I was a symbol of resolve. Someone who didn't just survive, but acted. Who turned grief into justice, money into meaning. Donations flooded in, emails, letters, checks with notes that said, "In memory of someone like Martin." The foundation was real, and so was the quiet revenge. Because nothing stings more to people like Helen than being erased from the story they thought they'd written. She didn't just fail to kill me, she failed to keep her name on the fortune. Now it belonged to something that would live far beyond either of us, and I would make sure of it. By June, Helen had become radioactive. Her social circle evaporated overnight. The friends who once toasted her birthday with expensive Prosecco now crossed streets to avoid eye contact. Her name disappeared from the country club newsletter. The realtor she'd hired to sell her BMW stopped returning calls. She tried to fight it, of course, filed motions, appeared on a local talk show claiming she was the victim of misunderstood grief, blamed Martin's death on a medical error, called the sabotage evidence circumstantial, claimed I was obsessed, delusional, that I had always resented her success. It didn't stick, because people had seen the footage. They'd read the reports, watched her squirm in court, and they remembered Martin. Not the man in the hospice bed, but the visionary, the one who made cybersecurity feel like protection, not paranoia. He'd spoken at schools, hired veterans, donated to disaster relief programs before his company ever turned a profit. People trusted him. They didn't trust her. The DA scheduled the criminal trial for September. The civil suit I'd filed, for attempted murder, emotional distress, and estate fraud, was given an expedited track. Helen's lawyer fought to delay, citing mental health stress. The judge denied it. In the meantime, I turned inward. The house got quieter after the foundation launched. No reporters, no drama, just peace. I found myself waking at sunrise, walking the block, noticing birds again. I bought new chairs for the porch, painted the back fence, replaced the water heater I'd been ignoring for 3 years. Everything I hadn't touched while bleeding money into Helen and Martin's old life now became part of my healing. One Saturday morning, Garrett came by with 2 coffees. "Your paint job's holding up," he said, nodding toward the fence. "Hard to believe I finally spent money on myself." He sat beside me on the porch swing. "You did more than that," he said. "You dragged something rotten into the light. I didn't expect it to get this far." Garrett sipped. "You didn't expect to survive." We sat in silence after that. Neighbors waved. A child rode by on a scooter with streamers. It was the kind of moment I used to miss, always distracted by bills I couldn't afford, by phone calls that started with, "Sorry to ask again," but now I was present. That afternoon, I received a letter from a woman in Minnesota, a widow. Her daughter had married a man who drained her savings and walked away. She'd read the Tribune story and said simply, "You made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Thank you." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer next to Martin's note. Proof that doing the right thing doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Helen's next move came via a countersuit. Defamation. It landed on my doorstep with a dull thud, thick as a phone book, full of manufactured grievances. But my lawyer, Edward, only chuckled as he flipped through it. "Let her try," he said. "She's just lighting matches in a hurricane." And he was right, because the truth didn't fear courtrooms. It welcomed them. The date was set, September 3rd, and I would be there, front row again, not as a victim, but as the man who made it impossible for her to bury what she did. September arrived with heat and tension. The courthouse AC couldn't quite fight the thick Chicago air. Sweat slicked beneath collars, reporters crowded the marble halls, and the sound of heels and camera shutters filled every echoing corner. The People vs. Helen Jordan was officially underway. The courtroom was packed, not just with legal teams and media, but with former colleagues of Martin's, engineers, veterans, a few small business owners whose companies had survived ransomware attacks thanks to his software. They came to witness the trial of the woman who'd once toasted his birthday, and then, quietly, methodically, killed him. Helen sat with her defense team in tailored gray, her hair pulled back so tightly it changed her face. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, just less inevitable. I sat just behind the prosecution table next to Garrett. He wore a blazer I hadn't seen since his retirement party. "Never thought I'd dress up to watch karma in real time," he whispered. The prosecutor, Jacinda Riley, was precise. No theatrics. She let the evidence speak. Tom Riley was first to testify, calm, deliberate, confident. He walked the jury through the sabotage photos like a professor giving a guest lecture. Then came the footage. The room went still as Helen's silhouette appeared on screen. Streetlight, tool bag, flashlight between her teeth. The slow, careful movements of a woman who knew how much time she had before detection. I watched the jurors' faces. No confusion, just slow horror. Next came Dr. Williams. She delivered her testimony like scripture. Clinical, exact. She didn't speculate, she diagnosed. The poison symptoms, the lack of proper testing, the convenient switch of medical providers, all of it stacked into a picture that no longer looked like coincidence. Helen's defense tried to dismantle each point, said the footage was grainy, said the reports were biased, claimed the brake line had failed from where, but every time Brandt stood, Jacinda followed, quietly, ruthlessly correcting him, reminding the jury that the man who died had left a handwritten warning, that the man who was supposed to die next, Mia, was still sitting in the room. And then finally it was my turn. I took the stand in a room that had already heard my story, but now I gave it voice. "I trusted her," I began. "Not because she earned it, because I thought Martin had chosen her, and if he chose her, I wanted to believe in that choice." I looked at the jury. She buried him while I was still processing his diagnosis. She planned a life without him, while he was still calling me to talk about treatments. And when she realized I stood in her way, she tried to make sure I wouldn't be at the reading of the will. Brandt objected. "Sustained," the judge said mildly. "Stick to what you experienced, Mr. Jordan." I nodded. I experienced a woman working under my car at midnight. I experienced a mechanic finding deliberate cuts in my brake lines. I experienced survival, and then I found the truth. Jacinda asked the final question. "Why are you here, Mr. Jordan?" I paused, not for effect, for memory. To make sure my son's legacy isn't buried next to him. I stepped down. The jury looked hollow-eyed. The kind of faces you see when people finally realize how evil can wear good tailoring. Helen still hadn't looked at me. Not once. I returned to my seat beside Garrett. "That's it?" he whispered. "No," I said. "Now we wait." And wait we did. 2 more days of closing arguments, of charts, citations, and closing performances. But I already knew. The verdict wouldn't change the outcome, because Helen had already lost the only thing she ever truly wanted. Control. The jury came back in under 4 hours. That was fast. Faster than anyone expected. Reporters scrambled back to their seats, camera crews reassembled, and I found myself gripping the edge of the pew like I might float off if I didn't hold on. "All rise," the bailiff said. Helen didn't look up as the judge re-entered. Her hands were folded but not praying, just clenched, as if sheer tension might keep her world from collapsing. The forewoman stood, a woman in her 60s with gray streaks in her braid and a notebook she never stopped writing in. "In the matter of the state of Illinois versus Helen Jordan," she began, "on the count of attempted murder, we find the defendant." She paused. "Guilty." The word dropped like a stone into silence. Helen didn't flinch. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud." "Guilty." 2 more counts followed, 2 more guilty verdicts. The judge thanked the jury, dismissed them, and turned to Helen. "Sentencing will be scheduled for 2 weeks from today. In the meantime, the court revokes bail. Miss Jordan will be remanded to custody." That was the first time she reacted. Her eyes widened just slightly, not surprise. Calculation. She'd expected to walk free for another 2 weeks. The math had changed. The bailiff approached, cuffs in hand. Helen turned to her lawyer, whispered something I couldn't hear. He nodded, but there was nothing left to negotiate. She was let out through the side door, and I felt nothing. No fist-pumping joy. No victorious swell of justice. Just the steady release of pressure. Like a valve finally turned after being sealed shut for too long. The press surged, of course. Patricia Jennings caught my eye but didn't approach. Just nodded, the way someone nods at a man leaving a fire he didn't start. Garrett and I walked out together. We didn't talk until we hit the sidewalk. "Well," he said, "that's that." "No," I said, "that's the end of the first chapter." We got burgers and sat on his back porch as the sun sank behind the rooftops. Neither of us were men of many words, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was earned. Later that night, I got a message from Edward. The civil suit hearing would proceed the following month, but with a criminal conviction already secured, the outcome was now a formality. I poured a small glass of whiskey, sat in my study, looked at the framed letter from Martin, the one with the sentence that started everything. "Be careful with Helen." I was, I said aloud, "and now the world knows who you really married." The house creaked softly in the night, old bones settling, and for the first time in what felt like years, I let myself cry. Not out of sadness, not even out of relief, but out of exhaustion. Because you can only carry so much grief before it asks to be set down. I wiped my eyes, took a breath, and started planning the next step. Not revenge, not trials, but what Martin's name would mean to people who never knew him. Because her story was ending, but his was just beginning. The prison transport van pulled out of the courthouse parking lot at 7:14 a.m., just 2 days after the sentencing hearing. I didn't watch it leave. I didn't need to. Helen Jordan was no longer part of my story. She was someone else's problem now. A state ID number, a jumpsuit, a locked door. For the next 15 years, she'd have a captive audience of cement walls and missed chances. Let her explain her motives to a concrete ceiling. I had other plans. The Martin Jordan Foundation officially launched that same week. No ribbon cutting, no champagne flutes. Just a press release, a bank transfer, and a promise. The website went live with a simple mission statement. We believe in protecting what matters: health, family, and integrity. In memory of Martin Jordan, we fund cancer research, digital safety initiatives, and family recovery programs for those betrayed by the people closest to them. By Friday, we'd received over 3,000 donations, some small, some shockingly large. All came with notes. For my sister who trusted the wrong man, for my dad. He gave everything and got nothing back. For the quiet ones who fight back and win. I read every message, some twice. I gave Marcus Chen a permanent role, Director of Investigations for Digital Fraud Cases. He accepted without hesitation. This feels like redemption, he said, for people who never got it in court. Dr. Williams joined the medical board. Tom Riley became a volunteer safety trainer for small nonprofits with company vehicles. Garrett even helped us set up a senior support outreach for neighborhoods like ours. The kind where widowers like me fall through the cracks, ignored until they're needed for favors or checks. The house got busier, not noisy, just alive. Volunteers coming by to help pack welcome kits. Legal interns cataloging case files. Letters arriving from men and women who finally had a name for what had happened to them. Familial exploitation. I made a point of writing back. Every week I picked 3 letters to answer by hand. Not as the founder, as a father. One came from a woman in rural Ohio whose son had drained her savings, then blamed her for his failing marriage. She was living in a trailer on Social Security checks. I sent a grant and a note. You're not crazy. You're not alone. And you deserve to feel safe again. Martin's name wasn't on a headstone anymore. It was on letterhead, on donation receipts, on people's lips when they talked about a place that helped them breathe again. He would have loved that. One morning, I visited the cemetery, took my usual bench, watched a young couple 2 rows down planting flowers. Fresh grief. I set a stone on Martin's grave. Jewish tradition, though we weren't religious. Still, it felt right. Weight over ornament. Something solid. I didn't let her win, I said. And I used the money the way you'd have wanted. The wind moved through the trees. A soft sound like a door closing far off. People are remembering you for who you really were, I added. Not who she pretended you were. I didn't stay long, just long enough. Back home, I made myself a lunch, sat on the porch. Let the breeze through the screen door remind me that the world hadn't stopped just because mine had bent. Helen had taken her shot, but I was still standing, not in defiance, in legacy. 2 weeks after the verdict, the civil court date arrived like an aftershock. Quieter than the criminal trial, but just as important. This one wasn't about jail time. It was about closure, about accountability, and about the money Helen had tried to kill for. She appeared in court via video from the Cook County Detention Center. No makeup, no stylist, just a wrinkled jumpsuit and fluorescent lighting that stripped every illusion from her face. Her attorney sat at a lonely table, visibly tired, visibly out of moves. The judge wasted no time. Given the criminal conviction and the overwhelming evidence submitted in the public record, she began, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Seth Jordan. I exhaled slowly. Helen stared at the screen like she couldn't quite hear it, like maybe this was a technical error. But the audio was perfect. The court awarded full damages, the attempted inheritance grab, emotional distress, legal fees, medical costs from the sabotaged vehicle. Every penny she'd hoped to hoard now carried her name on a restitution docket. She wasn't just going to prison, she was going broke. Edward leaned over and whispered, "She'll file appeals. Her lawyer will posture, but it's done. That money is untouchable now." The final judgment included a clause that made my throat tighten. All funds distributed to the Martin Jordan Foundation shall remain protected from civil recovery. These assets are deemed charitable under state law and cannot be reassigned to the defendant under any circumstances. That meant Helen couldn't claw any of it back. Not now, not ever. It was sealed. After the ruling, I stood outside the courthouse in a jacket I hadn't worn in years. Something Maria bought me on our last anniversary together. She always said it made me look quietly dangerous. The Tribune photographer took my picture for the follow-up article. No smile, just stillness. That evening, I held a small gathering at the Foundation's office. The team, a few volunteers, Garrett, Tom, Dr. Williams. We ordered pizza, drank sparkling water, and played music that Martin used to code to. Jazz fusion and strange ambient tracks he said helped him think sideways. There were no speeches, but at one point I tapped my glass and said quietly, "Martin didn't live long, but he lived right. And now everything she tried to erase is permanent." Heads nodded, a few people clinked glasses. No applause, just understanding. Later that night, when the lights were off and everyone had gone home, I walked the rows of framed photos on the office walls. Martin at 18, hunched over his first laptop. Martin at 35, smiling in front of his company's first headquarters. Martin holding a mock-up of his software's first government contract. And at the end, a single quote printed on glass beneath his photo: "Protect the vulnerable, even if no one's watching." That was the heartbeat of his work, and now it was the heartbeat of mine. In her greed, Helen had tried to silence him, but she'd made him louder than ever. And the most satisfying part? She'd paid for it. Autumn settled over Chicago in gold and rust. Leaves rattled down the sidewalks outside the Foundation office like soft applause. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged to the season. Not fighting it, not drowning in it, just present. I had one final thing to do. Martin's old house, the one Helen had tried to keep after his death, was now legally mine. A byproduct of the civil judgment. She'd fought to retain it, claimed emotional attachment, even suggested she could turn it into a women's business incubator as some kind of leverage for leniency. The judge wasn't moved. I didn't want to keep it, not really, but I needed to walk through it once, alone, to see what pieces of my son remained after she'd picked it clean. I parked down the street. Didn't bother with the driveway she'd once tried to make my grave. The house was empty, silent. Realtor signs in the window. My key turned in the lock like it had always belonged to me. Inside, it smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh paint. The staging team had tried their best. Neutral colors, abstract art, but the bones of the house remembered. I walked the room slowly. The kitchen where Martin used to burn toast at 2 a.m. because coding made him forget to eat. The hallway where I helped him hang drywall during renovations. He'd insisted on doing it himself to stay grounded. The office still had built-in shelves, no furniture. But the ghost of that room clung to the air. I remembered walking in one afternoon, long before Helen, and seeing him standing in the window light, grinning. "Dad," he'd said, "I think I cracked it. A vulnerability nobody's patched yet. This could change everything." And it had. I stood in that same spot now, hands in my coat pockets, and whispered, "You were right." I didn't cry, but I stayed there a long time. When I finally left, I locked the door behind me and called the agent. "List it tomorrow," I said, "but I want all proceeds transferred directly to the foundation. Mark it anonymous." She hesitated. "You sure?" "Absolutely. That house doesn't belong to anyone anymore. Let it help someone start over." I hung up, walked back to my car. The sun was low, stretching everything long and soft. I passed Helen's old flower beds, now wilted, untended, and noticed something blooming out of season. A single snapdragon, stubborn, colorful, out of place, fitting. Back at home, I found a letter waiting for me. From Michael. I hadn't heard from him since the trial. His silence had been its own kind of verdict. I opened the envelope. No apology, No excuses, just a photograph. Martin, young, maybe 25. Arm slung over Michael's shoulder. Both smiling, sweaty, standing on the lawn of our old house after helping me pour new concrete for the driveway. On the back, Michael had written one sentence in pen. He loved you more than I ever understood. That was enough. I set the photo on my desk, not forgiveness, but a start. Thanksgiving came quiet that year. No invitations, no obligations. Just a roast chicken, a bottle of wine, and a long walk through my neighborhood where wind stirred old leaves across cracked sidewalks like memories trying to find a place to land. I didn't feel alone. That surprised me. Rosa had invited me, of course, 3 times. Her kids had drawn me cards with stick figure turkeys and T.O. Dennis scrawled in crooked crayon. But I told her I needed a different kind of day. No pity, no performance, just peace. I made a fire in the fireplace. Put on a record Maria used to love. Let the house feel full even if no one else was in it. Somewhere across town, Helen was eating off a plastic tray in a room with locked doors and a light that never turned all the way off. Her story had gone cold in the press. The buzz wore off. The narrative aged out of shock value. But mine didn't. The Martin Jordan Foundation had grown. We'd funded 4 university fellowships, opened 2 digital safety clinics, partnered with a legal aid group for elder financial abuse. The work was steady, unglamorous, vital, and people remembered Martin not as the man who died young, but the one who left something better behind. One evening, Tom Riley came by with a 6-pack and news. They offered me a position, he said, settling into my back porch chair. Full-time fleet oversight for the city. Said my work on your case put me on their radar. I clinked my glass to his. You deserve it, he smiled. I almost didn't take it. Didn't want to stop doing right by folks like you. You still will, just with more reach. He looked at me for a long moment. Funny, isn't it? The worst thing she ever did ended up giving a bunch of people their best shot. Poetic, I said. No, just math. You get enough good people in one place, something decent happens. I nodded. It wasn't elegant, but it was true. The next week, I got a letter from the prison. Helen. 2 pages, handwritten. Neat penmanship? No apology. She called it a reckoning. Said she hadn't meant to kill me. Just scare me into backing down. Said Martin's illness had broken something loose inside her. That it wasn't about the money. It was about not disappearing. She asked me to write back. Said she wanted to understand the kind of man who could take everything she tried to destroy and turn it into something holy. I read it twice. Then I burned it in the fireplace. Not out of hate, just clarity. Some people try to carve truth out of their consequences. Others just want to be seen one more time. I didn't owe her that. Later that night, I stood on my porch and looked up at the stars. The kind of cold that sharpens the air, the kind of silence that feels earned. I remembered Martin as a boy, running across the yard with a flashlight, looking for constellations. That one's Orion, he'd shout. See the belt? I didn't see it then. But I do now, clear as anything. Christmas Eve returned like a ghost with familiar footsteps. The streetlights blinked across fresh snow. Kids squealed down sidewalks in heavy coats. The scent of fireplaces curled through the air like old stories. A year ago, I was outside Helen and Michael's house, briefcase in hand, dignity unraveling by degrees. Tonight, I was warm. Not just in the house, in myself. I still remembered every second of that night. The wine glasses, the laughter that stopped cold when I stepped through the door, the sound of Katherine Jenkins' breath catching when she realized I wasn't just dropping off a gift. I was the gift. The truth they never expected to receive. It hadn't been revenge, not really. It was something deeper, older. That primal aching need to say, I matter. What I gave mattered. And now, a year later, I no longer needed to prove it. The doorbell rang at 6:10 p.m. I expected Rosa and her family. We'd arranged a small dinner, something relaxed. But it was Michael. He stood there, shoulders hunched, a bottle of wine in one hand, and a foil-covered pie dish in the other. "Pumpkin," he said. "I didn't make it, Rosa did. But I figured it might mean something coming from me." I let him in. He moved carefully like the floor might judge him. "I saw the news," he said, setting the wine on the table. "That new grant to fund encryption support for nonprofits. Martin would have loved that. He would have built it himself." Michael nodded. "Yeah, he would have." He looked around. The last time he'd been here, he was rehearsing excuses. Tonight, he looked like a man who'd run out of them. "I don't expect a miracle," he said, "but if there's room at the table, I'd be grateful." I thought about the weight of a year, about his silence, about how grief had twisted us both in different directions. Then I stepped back and gestured toward the dining room. "There's always room," I said. "You just have to want the seat." We ate in quiet, the kind that's full, not empty. Michael told me about therapy, about separating from Isabella, about trying to unlearn years of letting louder voices dictate his choices. He didn't ask for money, not once. That, more than anything, told me he was serious. After dinner, we walked through the neighborhood. Lights blinked from rooftops. Snow collected on railings. And for the first time since Martin's death, my son walked beside me with his hands out of his pockets, eyes forward. "Dad," he said as we turned the corner. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on his memory." I swallowed hard. "You helped me see it right," he said. "I only wish I'd seen it sooner." "You're seeing it now." He nodded. "That counts for something." "It does." We stopped outside the old school where Martin once played chess with the janitor on lunch breaks. The front doors were dark, but the snow reflected light from every angle. "I don't want to lose what's left," Michael said. "Not you, not this." "Then don't." We stood there, shoulder to shoulder, two men carrying the same name, different weights. It was Christmas Eve again, but this time the door was open. New Year's Day arrived hushed, as if even time itself was walking gently into the future. I made coffee the old way, stovetop, slow, no machine. Maria used to say the ritual mattered more than the result. I stood by the window, watching the street in soft winter blue, and thought about what had been lost and what had been saved. Helen's name hadn't appeared in a headline in months. She was serving her sentence now. State prison, a number in a file. There were rumors of a breakdown, of solitary confinement after an altercation. I didn't follow the updates. The noise wasn't mine to carry anymore. What I carried now was quieter. Letters. From people I'd never met, thanking the Foundation for help, guidance, courage. From young men starting their first tech jobs on scholarships funded by Martin's name. From a woman in Topeka who said she'd finally left her husband after reading our story and realizing financial abuse was still abuse. And then there was the letter from a teenage girl in Maine. "I showed your story to my granddad. He thought he was the only one." Now he's smiling again. "Thank you. That one I framed." Michael called on January 3rd. He was on his way back to Spokane for a few months. Said he wanted to reconnect with some old friends. Visit his mother's family. Maybe build something of his own. For the first time, he didn't sound like a boy asking for permission. Before he hung up, he said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." It landed softer than I expected, and heavier. The next day, I visited the foundation office. Quiet post-holiday hum. Volunteers sweeping, cataloging mail. Tom Riley fixing the loose door to the storage room. I left a note on the corkboard before I stepped back out into the cold. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what keeps working after you're gone. Later that week, I got a call from Dr. Williams. Her voice was different. Light. She said one of the research grants the foundation funded had helped fast-track a new diagnostic tool for early-stage poisoning detection. Could have saved Martin, maybe, she said gently, but it'll save someone else. I said nothing for a long time. Then, that's the best news I've heard in years. Because that's what justice becomes eventually. Not courtroom victories, not headlines or press releases. Just the slow repair of things broken by someone else's greed. The house was quiet that evening. I turned off all the lights except the one above the kitchen sink. That was Maria's habit. Makes the house feel watched over, she used to say. I stood by the window, coffee in hand again, and I whispered into the dark, "We're okay now." I wasn't talking to anyone in particular, but somehow it felt like someone heard. Spring crept in the way truth does. Quiet, steady, undeniable. One morning the air smelled different. Not warm, not yet, but softer. Less defensive. I found myself in the garage, sorting through old boxes I'd promised Maria I'd organize one day. There was a photograph I hadn't seen in years. Martin at age 10, sitting cross-legged on the driveway, holding a busted motherboard like it was sacred. His shoelaces untied, his brow furrowed with concentration. He'd never been afraid to take things apart. Just to make them better. I framed the photo and placed it on my bookshelf, next to the first printed report from the Foundation's annual review. 32 pages of real work. Real change. Lives protected. Legacies built. When the letter came from the Department of Corrections, I expected paperwork. Instead, it was a short notification. Helen had filed a motion for early release under a revised hardship clause. Some loophole tucked into legislation that wasn't meant for people like her. The hearing was scheduled for June. Edward called the next morning. "You want to fight it?" "I want to attend," I said, "but I won't say a word." And I didn't. I wore the same suit I wore to the trial. Sat in the back row of the small courtroom with a notebook in my hand, though I didn't write a thing. Helen looked worse for wear. Thinner, paler, but the same steel in her eyes. Her lawyer cited health issues, isolation, claimed she'd demonstrated good behavior and had accepted the court's judgment with dignity. I almost laughed. The judge didn't. She read from the original trial record, recounted the sabotage, the video footage, Martin's letter, my testimony. Then she looked Helen in the eye and said, "Your crimes were not the result of desperation. They were the result of calculation. The court sees no reason to adjust your sentence." Motion denied. I stepped outside before Helen was led away, and for the first time since all of it began, she looked at me. Not with hatred, not with victory, just resignation, like she knew this was the last page of her story and mine. I didn't nod, didn't speak, I just let her look. Then I walked away. That evening I drove to the lake. Same bench where Martin and I used to eat sandwiches after he got out of high school. I could still hear him explaining firewalls and encryption protocols like they were magic. I looked out over the water and said, "She tried to come back." And I let the wind carry the rest of it. Because some things don't need saying. They just need surviving. I spent my 68th birthday in the company of people who didn't owe me anything. Rosa brought a cake. Store-bought, too much frosting. Her grandkids made cards out of printer paper and markers. One said, "Dennis is strong," in crooked block letters. I hung it above my desk. We ate, laughed, sat on the porch until the sky turned lavender. No speeches, no stories about loss, just a quiet orbit of presence. After everyone left, I poured a drink and stood by the window. My reflection looked older, sure, but I saw something in the eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. Stillness. Not the kind born of defeat, but the kind you earn after you walk through fire and don't come out a ghost. Helen would be gone for a long time. Her name would never again open doors. No memoir, no redemption tour. Just time and silence. The sentence she feared more than any prison. Michael called that weekend. We didn't talk long, just enough. He said, I'm seeing things clearer now, trying to live in a way that honors him. And you, I told him that was the only kind of inheritance that mattered. The foundation moved into a new space near the lake. Nothing fancy, brick and glass, the kind of place Martin would have chosen. Functional, safe, invisible until you needed it. Tom came by once a week to check the building systems. Dr. Williams brought interns. Garrett gave a speech to a local senior center about spotting fraud. It wasn't a monument, it was a workshop. We didn't build statues, we built shields. And late at night, when the world fell quiet again, I'd find myself in the study thumbing through the original folder, the one labeled "For the Prosecutor." I never threw it out, not out of bitterness, but as proof that the truth, when handled patiently, can still find its way through every lie. The picture Michael sent after the trial stayed on my desk. Martin and him grinning. Before the money, before the bitterness, before we let things rot. Sometimes I imagined what Martin might say now. I don't think he'd talk about Helen at all. I think he'd talk about the people the foundation helped, the kids we kept out of scams, the families we kept whole. He never wanted to be famous. He just wanted to build something that worked when it mattered. And in the end, he did. One night I left the porch light on by accident. Neighbors mentioned it. Thought maybe I was waiting for someone. I wasn't. But I liked the idea that the house looked ready, that someone might drive by and see that warm glow and think, someone is still home. That's all I ever wanted, really, to still be home. If you followed this story, thank you for reading. Take care of yourself, and leave the porch light on once in a while. For no one in particular, just in case.